Hello, this is Gary Marr from Linux Community College. This screencast is for my CIS133DA online spring 2018 class. In this screencast, I want to talk about Unit C. I'll be covering some PowerPoints. I'll be talking about some examples that are covered in the textbook. Since this is a video, it tends to shrink the PowerPoint slides, make it difficult to read. So what I would suggest is go to Canvas in the Files section, download the PowerPoint for Unit C and also the sample files that I'll be talking about during this presentation. Okay? CSS. What you will find if you continue your career with web page development or web development is that there's multiple technologies involved with creating a robust website. HTML is the skeleton, the framing, the bones, if you will, that the structure is built onto. And then other technologies like CSS, JavaScript, PHP add additional features that make the site more interactive, more like what I would call watching TV. Back in the old days when HTML was first available in the early 80s, early to mid 80s, it was primarily used to share documents between research institutions. Wasn't terribly interesting. It was basically a colored background, maybe black for the text. It had the ability to do some headers, some links, and it showed some pictures, and that was about it. When they began to develop this technology to be more for marketing, selling, customer support, it became more like TV. More interactivity, more graphics, more animation, sound, etc. All of these technologies or these features became something that was needed and was implemented with these other partner technologies like CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. I guess the important word here is being style. And it's used either within an HTML file as statements or outside of an HTML file as an external file to provide styling on your HTML pages. Pretty much all of your assignments from C to M will include style sheets from now on. It really what gives this site pizzazz, something you're going to want to have as part of your web pages. What CSS is a series of style rules. And it does things like provide background color, center text, containers, a lot of shadows, a whole bunch of stuff that we'll learn over the next 16 weeks. CSS statements are kind of divided into two parts. The first part is a selector, which is essentially lets you define which HTML elements or attributes you want to affect. And the second is the declaration piece, which tells the style that you want to apply to that selector. This is getting kind of tiny font again to read from the video, so you might want to look at this at the actual PowerPoint slide or from the textbook. But here we have a HTML tag paragraph that when the HTML style rules are applied will center the text and make the background color ivory. Okay, it's just one example of many that many styles you can apply with CSS. In fact, I would tell you that a lot of the sophisticated development of web pages now has become so, in a sense, complicated or so specific. You have designers of pages who work primarily with art, images, and CSS. You have programmers that work with PHP and JavaScript, and then probably HTML is used by everyone. So these can get quite complicated, and in this class not so much, but if you have a real interest in the artistic elements of web pages, you're going to get into this technology in a big way before you're done. There's two ways to apply style to your pages. You can either do it as an embedded style sheet or you can do it as an external style sheet. The embedded style sheet is fine. It's a quick and dirty way of applying the style to your page. The problem with it is that it doesn't, it's sometimes hard to follow if you're going to take and be using style across multiple pages, which typically happens quite often. You're going to find that if you have a style that you want to use for your web page, that these are certain colors and fonts, etc. If you access multiple pages from that site, you want them all to appear the same way. If you're using embedded style sheet, then you have to make sure that block of code has been copied and pasted in every HTML page. Now, this is opposed to the external style sheet, which is a separate file that's linked into your page. We'll cover that in a few more slides. Sorry for jumping around there. I ended up hitting the end button by mistake. All right. Here we go. This is very hard to read. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop over here to Notepad++, and let's look at an embedded example. This is, I believe, the same one we finished with in Unit B. It's simply some HTML, but it now has some style. The style is identified by a tag. Style is typically, it can appear anywhere in your HTML document, but typically you're going to find it in the header section, or the head section, I should say, of your page. Once you have the style tags, you then will start to see the selector and the declaration for your CSS. The selector being the body and the declaration being color equals ivory, or background color ivory, and text align left. The selector has different there's different ways of looking, or different ways of defining selectors. I can define a selector as a section of my document. I can assign a style based on an ID on a tag. This is very popular with the div blocks. I mentioned this last time in Unit B. I said div blocks are very important in terms of applying things like style and JavaScript and stuff. And this basically says any tag that I specify an attribute ID of contact will have this attribute applied. The dot is a class attribute, so anything I define with a class of accent will have this particular attribute. And then finally, the last one says anything that is either an H1 tag or is an ID of contact will apply this style. Now, the selector technology isn't complicated, but it's something we're going to have to build on. I don't expect I could probably explain that all today. Look at the examples in the textbook. Play with examples that that you can download. Look at some examples online. In fact, I think we've talked about this, and if not, we'll do it in a second here. But you can always take and view the source from any page that you render on a browser, even if it's not your page, by right-clicking on the page and saying View Source. You can then look at the CSS if you'd like. Let me go back to the presentation. Next page. Selector. Okay, the ID selector. Just talked about it. It's when you specify in your tag an ID for that tag, and essentially gives it a name, a unique name. And in this case, it's the word name, so that when I develop a style, I can specifically have that style apply to this ID or this particular paragraph tag that's going to display the word John Smith. Whatever you choose as an ID is up to you. It's going to have to be text and numbers. It can't have any spaces in it. You want to make the ID meaningful, the name meaningful, so it basically gives the person looking at your page an idea of what it's supposed to reference. And when I say looking at your page, I'm talking about another web developer. The user doesn't see any of this stuff. Here's an example of that in the text. Again, we have a ID called contact. And again, the style has been changed because of it. Down below is the previous slide, or it shows in that page where contact has been specified as an ID. You can also see that in Notepad in the previous screen that I showed you earlier also. That's the outcome. Class attributes a little different. When something's a class, you basically want it to apply to a range of things. Maybe you want all of the paragraphs in a particular section of your document to have a class of opening, and when you define the style of opening, all those sections would do or look the same way. This is a way of kind of going one step beyond ID, which identifies one unique element tag, to a range of tags or a range of things that you're going to supply style to. In this case, it's accent. So if we look at the example, you have an accent class on 2 items, not 1, because again, this is the accent or the class attributes used to define style for multiple things. So you have 2 paragraph tags with a class of accent, so that when that is rendered, it looks for the style class of accent, and it's going to do whatever that class definition is in the style statement. In this case, it's going to be, looks like a color of dark cyan. There's an example of that. Multiple selectors. This can get very, very tricky very quickly. Now, fortunately, I chose an easy one for us. Basically, this when you put each selector in the divided by a comma, it just essentially does an and. This one and this one and this one all will have the same attributes. It can get a lot more complicated than this. Some of those examples are in the book, and I believe some of them are actually in the PowerPoint too. I don't do a lot with these myself. I tend to find they can get really complicated very quickly. But again, I'm more of the person who is a programmer of web pages than a style person. But don't let that hold you back. There's plenty of documentation on the internet on style and how to apply it, and if you're going to use multiple selectors. One of the sites that's very good for both HTML, CSS, and pretty much anything web is w3schools.com. The nice thing about this site is not only do they tell you the answer to your question, but they typically gives you an example and the ability to change the example online to see how that would work. We may have some part of my presentation here somewhere along the way may go into a W3 Schools webpage to show you this. We won't do this for today. I would just say visit the site. There's some good stuff there. I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to talk too much about the multiple designations now. I think we'll let you mess with that yourself, and we'll get into that as the course moves on. I do want to talk about external style sheets. External style sheets are nice because it separates the style from the HTML. And again, they're different technologies, and they don't have the same syntax. So putting it in a separate file lets you think, well, one file is HTML, I'll put my HTML head on. The other one, CSS, I'll put my HTML head or hat on, or my CSS head or hat on. And it lets me separate those. It also lets me reuse the CSS from multiple sites or multiple web pages, which is good because typically what's going to happen is, like in the case of, let's say, GCC, there's a common look and feel of all the GCC web pages. That is implemented through a bunch of technologies, but CSS is one of those primary technologies. The coloring, the fonts, the position, the containers, the boxes, how it appears when we put an external file that's called into all of the pages that are displayed in the GCC site. The external file contains only the style statements, that's all. And notice there's no style tags here. Here's an example. But yet what will happen is in your HTML, in the top of the head section, you will typically reference that style sheet to be used. Now let me go back over here to my examples. I'm not going to choose the embedded one this time. Let's just look at the other index page here. And lo and behold, there is the link to my style sheet. It's going to be a link tag. It's going to be related to a style sheet. It's going to identify the kind of file it is. And then it's going to tell me what that style sheet name is. Now, what you're going to find is that when you call these external files into your web page, you have to be very sensitive to their location on your server. So what you'll want to do is, for this class, make sure that your HTML file and your external style file are in the same folder. Now, you can always have subfolders, but if you use subfolders, you're going to have to change the syntax slightly. Pathing is something that can get very kind of frustrating with a lot of new HTML designers, and it's something we'll hit later in class. We're not going to spend too much time with it today. If I actually look at that file, and this one's referencing one called styles, this is my styles file that's being called in externally. And you'll see that what it has is essentially the tags we just talked about. Again, notice the syntax coloring. Notice that the file type is also CSS. It's no longer HTML. And then also look at this blue section. You'll probably remember dark blue as being the comment section on my HTML files. What also comes up by default in dark blue in Notepad the same way, but the comment designator is different. Instead of having arrow, exclamation point, dash, and then close arrow, and then closing it with close arrow, dash, dash, it's different. It's a slash asterisk to start the beginning of the comment and a slash asterisk to conclude the comment. I can also, if I want to, do double slashes for a single line comment that only has one line. If I can type there. Okay, that's also an option. Double line, or the multiple line, is probably the easiest to use though. Okay, back to the PowerPoints. Let's see. That's just referencing the external style sheet we just talked about. The link, we talked about that as being part of the HTML file. The comments are there. Okay. Now, the one thing I've just noticed this, I have to be careful of. I believe that double slash will work for a single line tag, but it may not. So I guess I should be careful of that one. This comment syntax is very common with the C family of programming languages. C, C Sharp, C++, Java, etc., JavaScript. And a double slash usually means a single line comment. That may not be the case here. I'll have to double check it. But slash asterisk to start the tag, asterisk slash to end it. Okay, there's our comment again. And just like there was the ability to validate your HTML code, you can also validate your CSS code using the same site, just a different page that we did earlier in Unit B. So let me go over here. In fact, this might answer a question for us. I was wondering about a double slash being a valid comment. So let's just put a double slash in there. Let me Control A to copy it or to mark all of the lines, so Control C to copy it. Let me get back over to the validation service. Let me click down here on where it says CSS style sheets. That gives me a different header on top here, therefore a different page. I'm going to paste my CSS in here, and I'm going to check it. And we found one error, and I suspect the error is, yes, double slash does not work. I apologize. One of the most confusing things about learning and teaching some of this technology is some of it's the same and some of it's slightly different. Enough about that, I guess, for now. But double slash does not work. So if I go back and want to revalidate this, I believe, let's see if I go back a page, I can certainly take out that part of it. And let me revalidate this and see if it comes, yeah, and now it's fine. So a double slash is not valid for a single comment line. I would still have to use slash asterisk and then asterisk slash to terminate my comment. Back to the PowerPoints. And I believe that's all of the PowerPoints for now. Again, download the sample files. Try them. Look at them. Understand what's going on. If you have questions, let me know. I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.